All right, welcome in everyone to the deep dive. We're going to crack open a report today.
Oh, sounds exciting.
It is, especially if you like data.
Well, that's kind of why we're all here, right?
Exactly. So this report is the 2024 Cybercrime Activity Report.
Yeah.
Which they just released last month, February 2025. So hot off the presses, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to really get into this and give you the need-to-know info, the trends, the predictions, all that good stuff.
Yeah, there's so much out there, so much data, so much noise. We wanted to sift through it all, pull out the most important bits, particularly for you guys, so you can get a clear picture of what the cybercrime world looks like right now.
Exactly. And, this report, it covers a lot of ground, but we're going to focus on a few key areas, right? We're talking ransomware, those nasty info stealers, the tactics that these criminals are using, and of course what the experts are predicting for this year.
Looking ahead, always important.
Always. So, the report, it actually looks at both global cybercrime and then zooms in on Israel specifically, just to give us a bit more of a focused view.
Yeah, it's great to have that global context and then see how things are playing out in a specific region.
Totally. So, let's jump right in. Let's start with the big picture. Ransomware.
Okay, hit me with the numbers.
All right, so globally, the report says 6,133 organizations were hit with ransomware in 2024.
Wow, that's a pretty significant number.
It is. It's actually a 15% increase from 2023.
So it's not slowing down.
Not at all, unfortunately. And, the report really highlights that healthcare remains a huge target.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're dealing with such sensitive data, life or death stuff, disrupting those systems. It can have immediate and serious consequences.
Absolutely. Systems go down, lives are potentially at risk. It's scary stuff. What other sectors are they really focusing on?
Well, the report mentions public entities, like government services, local services. They often rely on, sometimes they're running on older systems.
Legacy systems.
Exactly. And, those systems are not always as secure as they could be, so it makes them easier targets, unfortunately.
Right.
And the manufacturing, that's another big one. Think about it. Halting production lines. That puts immense pressure on companies to pay up quickly.
Huge financial losses.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the tech sector itself. Always a prime target. They have their own valuable data, but they also often hold a lot of intelligence that's, of interest to certain parties.
For sure. Different motives, but all leading to that same bottom line, the ransom demand. Now, one thing that really struck me was the ransomware group landscape. The report says 48 new groups popped up in 2024.
48.
Yeah, that's a lot of new players entering the game.
It's getting crowded out there. So that brings the total number of active groups to over 130.
It's like a whole underground industry,
Yep.
But here's the thing. Despite all these new groups, the report also says that a small number of dominant groups are behind most of the attacks.
So it's not as chaotic as it seems.
Right. Just 24 groups were responsible for over 60% of attacks.
So you have all these rookies coming in, but the veterans, the ones with the experience and the infrastructure, they're still the ones calling the shots.
Exactly. It's fascinating. Okay, let's move on to another big issue. Info stealers.
All right, info stealers. These are nasty little pieces of work.
They really are. And the numbers are staggering. The report says there were over 39 million cases of info stealer infections globally in 2024.
39 million.
Yeah, 39,119,905 to be exact.
Wow. I knew they were widespread, but that's mind-blowing. For those who don't know, maybe we should explain exactly what these things are.
Yeah, good point. So info stealers, they're this type of malware, malicious software. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they sneak onto your device and they steal your sensitive information.
So we're talking passwords, credit card numbers, browsing history, all that juicy stuff.
Exactly. And you might not even know it's happening. And the scary part is how they're used in conjunction with ransomware.
Right. They're like the advanced team.
Exactly. They gather intel, they find the weak spots, and that allows the attackers to then launch a more effective ransomware attack.
So they're not just stealing data, they're opening doors for other attacks.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, according to the report, the cost of this stolen data on the dark web is ridiculously low.
How low are we talking?
Like $1 to $10 per set of credentials.
So for less than the price of a cup of coffee, a cybercriminal could potentially get their hands on your banking logins.
It's a scary thought. Okay, so we've looked at the global picture. Let's zoom in on Israel now. The report has a whole section dedicated to cybercrime there.
Yeah, and it seems they're seeing similar trends to the rest of the world, but with some unique twists.
Right. So first off, ransomware attacks in Israel. Way up. The INCD, that's the Israel National Cyber Directorate, they recorded over 300 attacks in 2024.
300? That's a pretty big jump from 2023.
Huge jump. And they saw a lot of the usual suspects, the ransomware families that are active globally.
Like who?
Well, STOPDJVU was a common one. They tend to go after smaller businesses, individuals, spread through those, those dodgy software downloads.
Oh, yeah, those cracked programs, things like that.
Exactly. You can often spot them because they add this weird random 4-letter extension to the file names.
Ah, that's a telltale sign.
Yeah. And their ransom demands are usually not as high, maybe a few $100s at most.
Still disruptive, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then there's Lockbit, specifically the Lockbit builder. Now, this is interesting. The report says most of the Lockbit activity in Israel actually wasn't from the official Lockbit group. Yeah. You see, the official group, they got hit pretty hard by law enforcement disruption earlier in 2024. So what happened was their builder tool, it got leaked, and other cybercriminals started using it.
So even when the main group is disrupted, their tools can still be out there causing damage?
Exactly. It's like a hydra. You cut off one head, 2 more grow back. And actually, the report does say that the official Lockbit group, despite those setbacks, they were still somewhat active.
Wow, resilient, huh?
Very. And then another type of ransomware that was prevalent in Israel, Phobos. Specifically, various strains like LB, Devos, Faust, Makeup, Nigra.
Quite a lineup. What do we know about those?
Well, they're known for being quite persistent, adaptable, and the report says that initial access often came through insecure RDP connections.
RDP, that's remote desktop protocol, right?
Yep. A lot of businesses use it for remote access. But if it's not properly secured, it's basically an open invitation for attackers. And they were also getting in through stolen credentials.
So again, basic security hygiene is key here. Strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, securing those remote access points.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, speaking of specific groups, there were a couple of new ones that popped up in Israel.
Oh, tell me more.
Yeah, BrainCipher, they were pretty active in using the Lockbit ransomware. And then AlphaLocker, they were an interesting case. Only one reported victim in Israel, but the attack happened way before they even mentioned it on their data leak site.
So long delay.
Yeah, like 6 months or so. It's like they were just sitting on that information.
Strange.
Very. Okay, what about infostealers in Israel? Were those numbers just as bad as the global ones?
Unfortunately, yes. The report says 52,913 cases were reported in Israel.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of familiar names there. Redline, that was widely used for stealing logins, browser data. Generic stealer, as the name suggests, pretty generic, but still effective. Luma, that one's known for spreading fast and being good at evading detection. Yeah. And then Raccoon, it's popular because it's really easy to use. And a new one, Steal C, with some advanced features like keylogging, screen capture, you name it.
So a lot of the same tools that are being used globally.
Exactly. But the report also highlights some unique targeting in Israel. It wasn't just the usual suspects, like healthcare and finance.
Right. What else were they going after?
Well, this is interesting. Small to medium-sized logistics companies.
Logistics.
Yeah. The report suggests it's because they play such a crucial role in the supply chain. Attacking them can have a ripple effect throughout the whole economy.
Oh, I see. Disrupting those supply chains.
Exactly. And then they were also hitting car repair shops.
Car repair shops.
Yep. And accounting firms, law firms, even dental clinics.
Dental clinics. That's a new one.
Right. But think about it. Smaller healthcare providers, they don't always have the same level of cybersecurity as the bigger hospitals.
Yeah.
And those other businesses, accounting, law, they hold very sensitive client information.
Right. Valuable targets.
Exactly. And the report actually mentions that a lot of these unique targets in Israel were hit by a specific group that they'd mentioned in a previous report.
Did they name them?
Not specifically in this report. They just say a specific group mentioned in a previous report. So we're left to wonder.
Intriguing. But the bigger takeaway here is that certain groups are clearly focusing on these more niche sectors.
Exactly. And just like globally, small and medium businesses in Israel were hit especially hard.
Yeah. The report's pretty clear about that. They just often don't have the resources or the expertise to implement strong security measures.
It's a real vulnerability. And the report also touches on something I found really fascinating. the psychological impact of cyber attack.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. What was their point there?
Well, it's not just about the actual damage an attack causes, but also the fear and uncertainty it creates.
Right, that sense of panic.
Exactly. In our digital world, even the suggestion of a data breach can be enough to damage an organization's reputation.
So perception is everything.
It really is. And that's something attackers are increasingly exploiting. They know that even a minor incident can be blown out of proportion and cause a lot of damage.
Interesting. Okay, let's delve into some of the key trends they observed in 2024.
All right, let's do it.
The first one is this concept they call think green.
Think green. I like it. What's that all about?
Well, it's not as eco-friendly as it sounds. It's all about recycling data.
Recycling data.
Yeah. Basically, ransomware groups are taking old data from previous breaches, stuff that's already been leaked, and they're trying to pass it off as new.
So they're trying to create a sense of urgency, make it seem like there's been a fresh attack, even if there hasn't.
Exactly. It's a way to scare victims into paying up.
Clever, but deceptive. How can you tell if data's been recycled?
Well, the report stresses the importance of forensic analysis and threat intelligence. You have to carefully examine the data, compare it against records of previous breaches.
So basically, you need to be able to call their bluff.
Right. And that's where good threat intelligence comes in.
Yeah.
If you have access to that information, you can often debunk those claims and protect your organization's reputation.
Makes sense.
The next trend connects infostealers and initial access brokers. We talked about this a bit earlier, but it's worth diving deeper.
Right, because those infostealers, they're not just stealing data, they're providing that initial access point for other attacks, especially ransomware.
Exactly. And the report highlights just how integral they've become to the whole ransomware ecosystem.
And the fact that logs with compromised system credentials are so cheap, we're talking $1 to $10, that makes it incredibly easy for attackers to get a foothold.
Right. It's like a bargain basement sale for cybercrime tools.
And it's not just random accounts they're getting access to.
Yeah.
These logs often contain credentials for corporate networks, financial systems. It's a one-stop shop for multiple attacks.
Wow. And what's even more concerning is that the whole ecosystem around infostealers and these initial access brokers, it's become quite organized.
Oh, yeah. You've got specialized roles, developers creating the malware, distributors spreading it, brokers selling the access. It's a whole supply chain.
A well-oiled machine, unfortunately. Okay, the next trend has a rather catchy name. Child's play. Pass the parcel, also known as meow leaks.
Meow leaks, huh? That's got to be a reference to something.
I'm sure it is. But what it refers to is this: increasing collaboration and selling of access between different cybercrime groups.
So instead of just one group handling everything from start to finish, they're working together.
Exactly. One group might compromise an organization and then sell that access to another group that specializes in, say, ransomware. Or multiple brokers could be selling access to the same victim at different times.
So it's like passing a hot potato or a compromised network from one criminal to another.
Yeah, and that makes it even harder to track who's ultimately responsible. The report gives a specific example in Israel, an Israeli tax auditing firm. First, an access broker sold access to their systems, and then a couple months later, the MeowLeaks ransomware group hit them.
Wow. So that poor company was targeted multiple times.
It just shows you have to be vigilant, always. Okay, next up, we have a trend that's a little more techie. Abusing smart contracts.
This is where the blockchain gets interesting and potentially dangerous.
Right. It's still relatively uncommon, but the report says there's a growing trend of using smart contracts, those self-executing contracts on the blockchain, to do bad things.
Like what?
Well, for one, they're being used for command and control infrastructure. Basically how attackers communicate with and control the malware they've deployed.
So they're using the blockchain to make their communications harder to detect and disrupt.
Exactly. And they're also using it to exfiltrate stolen data.
Makes sense. It's decentralized, it's tamper-proof, it's kind of the perfect tool for a cybercriminal, in a way.
In a way, yeah. And the report draws a parallel with this malware from a few years back, Clipkeba, which also used the blockchain to evade detection.
So it's not a totally new tactic, but it seems to be gaining traction.
Right. And it seems like Russian-speaking threat actors are particularly keen on this.
Interesting.
Very. Okay, let's move on. The next trend is a big one. State-sponsored crime.
Yeah, that's a whole other level of complexity and danger.
Absolutely. The report talks about how the lines are increasingly blurred between financially motivated cybercrime and activities that are actually backed by nation-states.
Right, so governments are getting in on the action. or at least blurring the lines.
Exactly. They might be operating under the guise of criminal groups or maybe even collaborating with them.
So it's not just about money anymore. There could be political motives, espionage, sabotage.
Exactly. And the report specifically mentions Iranian adversaries. They've been seen on dark web forums, using new identities, working with established ransomware gangs.
So they're blending in with the criminal underworld.
Exactly. And that makes it even harder to track them and attribute attacks.
It's a worrying development.
Very. Okay, the next trend is virtual insanity, focusing on attacks targeting cloud environments.
Ah, the cloud. It's convenient, it's scalable, but it's also a big target for cybercriminals.
For sure. And the main issue, according to the report, is misconfigurations.
Misconfigurations.
Yeah, basically mistakes in how these complex cloud systems are set up. And those mistakes can create vulnerabilities that attackers can exploit.
Right, it's like leaving a door unlocked.
Exactly. And the report also notes a continued focus on attacking ESX and Linux-based systems.
So not just Windows anymore.
Nope. Attackers are branching out.
And I guess those systems might not always get the same level of security attention as Windows.
Right. So it's crucial for organizations to make sure their cloud security is robust no matter what systems they're using.
Agreed.
All right, let's dive into the nitty-gritty TTPs. That's tactics, techniques, and procedures.
The nuts and bolts of how these attacks actually happen.
Right. And first up is something called RMM and MFT abuse.
RMM and MFT. Those are acronyms we should probably unpack.
Good point. RMM stands for Remote Monitoring and Management. MFT is Managed File Transfer.
Ah, okay. And how are those being abused?
Well, these are tools that a lot of IT departments use, right? RMM for remote management of devices, MFT for securely transferring files.
Right. Makes sense.
But the problem is, these tools, they can have vulnerabilities. And attackers are figuring out how to exploit those vulnerabilities to gain access to systems.
So they're turning legitimate tools into weapons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once they're in, they can do a lot of damage. The report mentions ClairOP as a group that's known for using this tactic.
ClairOP, yeah, they're a major player in the ransomware scene.
They are.
Yeah.
And what this really highlights is the importance of strong access controls and constant monitoring, especially for these types of tools that can give attackers a lot of power if they manage to compromise them.
Agreed.
The next TTP is all about abused 2024 CVEs. Now, CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures.
Ah, right. So basically a list of known weaknesses in software.
Exactly. And when they say abused, they mean attackers are actively exploiting these vulnerabilities to break into systems.
And they're specifically focusing on 2024 CVEs, meaning those vulnerabilities that were discovered last year.
Right. And what's interesting is the report points out that many of the same software products that were targeted in 2023 were targeted again in 2024, often by the same groups.
So they're sticking with what works.
Exactly. They find a weakness, they exploit it, and they keep doing it until it gets patched.
Persistence is key, even in cybercrime.
Apparently so. And the report actually lists a whole bunch of specific CVEs that were abused in 2024. I won't bore you with the whole list, but it's pretty extensive.
It's a good reminder to always keep your software updated, patch those vulnerabilities as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Okay, the next section is titled Post-Lockbit 3.0 Era. Remember how we talked about the law enforcement operation that disrupted Lockbit?
Operation Kronos, yeah.
Right. Well, the question here is, what happened after that? Did it actually stop them?
And the answer is, drumroll.
Not really. They slowed down for a bit, but they came back with a Lockbit 4.0.
So they're like a cockroach. You can try to squash them, but they just keep coming back.
Exactly. And the report points out that this disruption actually contributed to a growing trend of something called encryption-less ransomware.
Encryption-less.
Yeah. So instead of actually encrypting your files, they just steal them and threaten to release them publicly if you don't pay.
So they're relying more on extortion and shame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's easier for them, right? They don't have to mess around with complex encryption algorithms.
And it's probably faster to just steal the data and move on to the next target.
Right. And the report also notes that more and more victims are experiencing data leaks, even if their systems weren't encrypted.
So it's definitely a tactic that's on the rise.
The report also highlights this seemingly contradictory idea of small strains, big damage.
How can a small strain cause big damage?
Well, it's all about those lesser-known ransomware variants. You know, they might not be as flashy or as well publicized as the big names like Lockbit, but they're still out there causing havoc.
Ah, so flying under the radar, but still causing a lot of trouble.
Exactly. The report specifically mentions Phobos and STOPD JVU as examples. They might not have dedicated leak sites or get a lot of media attention, but they're still hitting individuals and smaller businesses hard.
Right, so we can't just focus on the big players. We have to be aware of the whole spectrum of threats.
Totally. And speaking of sneaky tactics, the report also notes an uptick in attacks leveraging BitLocker.
BitLocker, that's the built-in encryption tool in Windows, right?
Yeah. And what these attackers are doing is they're essentially hijacking it. They gain control of your system and then use BitLocker to lock you out of your own data.
That's nasty. So your own security tool gets turned against you.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one last thing on ransomware. The report mentions code similarity across different families. Why is that important?
Well, it's all about understanding the connections, the relationships between these different groups.
Ah, like a family tree of malware.
Exactly. By analyzing the code, researchers can often trace the origins of different ransomware strains, see how they've evolved, and even identify who might be behind them.
So it's a way to track the bad guys.
In a way, yes. And sometimes understanding those code similarities can actually help develop decryption tools. They mention a specific example, Shinra ransomware, where analyzing the code led to a vaccine that could decrypt files locked by a whole group of variants.
Wow, so understanding those code connections can have real-world benefits.
Definitely. It's a key part of the fight against ransomware.
All right, moving on to something that's still emerging but potentially very dangerous. Adversaries leveraging AI.
Ah, yes. AI. The double-edged sword.
Exactly. And the report says that in 2024, we saw the very early stages of this. Cybercriminals are starting to experiment with using AI for things like creating malware and conducting reconnaissance.
So using AI to make their attacks more effective and harder to detect.
Right. Now, the report does say that these early attempts, they often had flaws. It seems the criminals haven't quite mastered AI development yet.
Well, they're still learning, but it's just a matter of time before they get better at it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so concerning. We have to start thinking about how to defend against AI-powered attacks, because they're coming.
It's like an arms race, but with algorithms instead of weapons.
Very true. Okay, last trend from 2024. The evolving approach of law enforcement.
Yeah, it seems they're shifting their tactics.
They are. Instead of just focusing on catching individual hackers, they're now going after the whole cybercrime infrastructure.
Ah, so targeting the support systems, the networks that enable these attacks.
Exactly. They're taking down illicit marketplaces, seizing servers, disrupting financial networks.
Makes sense. If you can dismantle the infrastructure, you can make it much harder for these criminals to operate.
Right. And the report highlights several successful operations from 2024. They took down the Xdedic marketplace, which was a hub for selling access to hacked servers. They disrupted the Warzone RAT infrastructure, which was used to control thousands of infected devices.
Wow, those are some big wins.
They are. And they also went after some major ransomware operations, even arrested some key figures.
So it's not just about taking down servers, it's about going after the people behind the attacks.
Right. And the report stresses that this success relies on collaboration between law enforcement agencies, private companies, and cybersecurity researchers.
It takes a village to fight cybercrime.
It really does. Okay, let's shift gears and look ahead. What does the future hold? Part 4 of the report outlines some predictions for 2025.
All right, time to gaze into the crystal ball.
First up, and perhaps not surprisingly, improved AI-driven cybercrime.
So those early fumbles we talked about, they're going to get ironed out.
That's the prediction. The report says that by mid-2025, we can expect to see much more sophisticated AI-driven malware. More functional, more evasive, more dangerous.
That's concerning.
It is, and it means that defenders are going to need to step up their game as well. Invest in AI-powered defenses to counter these AI-powered threats.
It's an AI arms race for sure.
The next prediction is something we've already touched on. The continued proliferation of low-cost, high-impact attacks.
Right. Those cheap access logs, the infostealers, they're not going away anytime soon.
Nope. And that means organizations need to really focus on endpoint security. Protecting individual devices is crucial.
And having good incident response plans in place, you need to be able to react quickly when a breach does happen.
Absolutely. Prediction number 3, increased cloud exploitation.
Yeah, as more and more organizations move to the cloud, it becomes a bigger target. And misconfigurations, those mistakes in setting up cloud systems, they're going to be a major point of vulnerability.
So cloud security training is essential, and implementing automated tools to help manage those configurations.
Automation can definitely help reduce the risk of human error.
All right, prediction number 4, the rise of leak-centric attacks.
So that's the whole breach, extort, leak model. Steal the data, threaten to release it.
Exactly. And the report predicts this is going to become even more common. So organizations need to really think about how they're going to prevent data leaks and how they're going to manage the situation if a leak does occur.
Reputation management is going to be key.
Absolutely. Prediction number 5, broader exploitation of decentralized technologies.
So they think we're going to see even more abuse of things like blockchain and smart contracts.
That's the prediction. So it's going to become increasingly important to have tools that can monitor blockchain activity, look for suspicious transactions, things like that.
It's a whole new world of threat detection.
It is. Okay, prediction number 6 offers a bit of hope. Increased collaboration between law enforcement and the cybersecurity industry.
That's definitely a positive trend.
It is. The more they work together, share information, coordinate their efforts, the more effective they'll be in fighting cybercrime.
Absolutely. We need all hands on deck.
Prediction number 7. Increased emphasis on exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities.
Oh, those newly discovered flaws that haven't been patched yet. They're like gold to cybercriminals.
Exactly. And they're often the key to getting into systems that are otherwise well protected.
So proactive vulnerability management is essential.
And having good threat intelligence so you know what vulnerabilities are being actively exploited.
Okay, what else is on the horizon?
Prediction number 8. The rise of AI-driven social engineering.
Uh-oh. That sounds scary.
It is. Think about it. AI can be used to create incredibly convincing phishing emails, fake websites, social media profiles.
So it'll be even harder to tell what's real and what's a scam.
Exactly. So continuous security awareness training for all employees is going to be more important than ever.
People are often the weakest link in the security chain.
Unfortunately, that's often the case. Okay, prediction number 9. Increased attacks on critical infrastructure, specifically OT systems.
OT, that's operational technology, right? The systems that control physical processes in things like power plants, factories, transportation systems.
Exactly. And the report predicts that these systems are going to be targeted more and more.
Which is really scary because disrupting those systems can have real-world physical consequences.
Absolutely. Blackouts, disruptions to transportation, even environmental damage.
So we need much better protection for OT systems.
Absolutely. Enhanced monitoring, segmentation, incident response plans specifically designed for.